Andrew from Sachs, and welcome to video number 3 in our 6-video sequence on the psychology of power. In this one we'll be talking about the neuroscience of power. What actually happens between the ears when a person assumes power? How does that change their behaviours? We'll start off with a kind of an interesting one. This is about perspective taking, Galinsky et al. In 2006, and a really interesting study because what happened is that people were primed for power. Priming is where you ask people to do something or perhaps confer something on them to make them feel more powerful. Priming is often used in psychological research. So you might get a person to recite something like, I am very powerful, or you might make them the boss of the study or something of that nature. But what they discovered, what Galinsky and colleagues discovered, was that when you ask people to write an E on their forehead, if they were primed for power, they would write the E in such a way that it suited them rather than other people. If they weren't primed for power, they were more likely to write the E so that other people could read it right way around rather than themselves. So that's a practical example of a neurological change of being primed for power. We also know that individuals primed with higher power reduce the level of accuracy that they have in social judgement. They tend to rely too heavily on their own perspectives, and they are actually not good at considering other people's perspectives. So just priming people to feel more powerful certainly affects their decision-making capability. Power can distort our visual perception, influencing how we see other people. In this study, people were primed to be powerful or primed to be less powerful. And the people who were primed to be more powerful tended to see other people as shorter than they actually were. The people who were primed to be less powerful tended to see other people as taller than they actually were. So it can affect our judgment of even things like physical height and stature. Other aspects from the neuroscience of power, one of the things that we know from Hogeveen and colleagues in 2014 is that power decreases interpersonal sensitivity. If we're primed for power, we are more likely to act insensitively towards other people. Now, an aspect of this characteristic is the use of a thing called the mirror neurons. Every human being is equipped with mirror neurons. This is the there but for the grace of God go I kind of effect. If you see somebody who is suffering, you tend to empathize with their suffering and mirror their emotions. That's why they're called mirror neurons. What's been demonstrated in this study is that when people are primed for power, their mirror neurons are less effective. They don't sensitize to other people's feelings as much as they otherwise might. And that causes them to tend to have decreased sensitivity, and it influences the degree to which people are able to consider how other people think, feel, and see the world. We also know that when people are primed for power, they tend to adopt a thing called moral hypocrisy. Now, moral hypocrisy is where, okay, if I do it, it's okay, but if other people do it, that's really bad, and they should be punished for that. We know that when people are primed for power, they tend to be more likely to take that perspective. People who are primed for power tend to be more likely to dehumanize others. Across the history of the world, we've seen it where people have wanted to undertake violent acts towards other people. What they often do is call them something, call them something derogatory, cockroaches or something of that nature. What we find is that when people are primed for power, they're actually more likely to demonstrate that behaviour and therefore to undertake that dehumanising kind of an activity. When people are primed for power, they actually can act in certain circumstances almost like they have brain damage. They lose sensitivity to the point where they're basically unable to empathise with other people, and that causes them to be far less likely to make appropriate judgments. And the power paradox is really that power simplifies our thinking. We tend to see things much more in terms of our own self-interest and less in terms of what would really benefit other people or the situation more generally. And not only that, high-power individuals are more likely to speak out of turn, interrupt each other, or to tease people in a humiliating fashion. Another piece of evidence about the fact that we act less sensitively when we're primed for power. This really raises the question about what do we do about this? And in the following videos, what we'll do is that we'll look at personality and how that relates to power, and we'll look at values and how that relates to power. But we'll finish up by talking about avoiding the negatives of power at work. And that's really about managing in such a way that we don't get those negatives that were identified in this video so far. Click on the link near this video to join us.